You're about to watch a woman walk into a criminal empire with nothing but a laptop and her mind, and walk out the most dangerous person in the room. Subscribe before we start. You'll want to be here for every single episode. 3:12 a.m. The elevator opened. 6 men came out firing. Adaoma hit the marble floor before the first bullet finished crossing the room, not from fear, from calculation. She pulled the laptop down with her, kept it open. She kept her fingers moving across the keys while glass shattered above her head and the penthouse alarms detonated into red. Behind the kitchen island, Kang Sejin moved with the silence of a man who had survived rooms like this before. One hand pressed flat against the wound on his left side, the other holding a weapon he hadn't needed to think about reaching for. He'd already had it. "How many?" he said. "6 on this floor." Adaoma didn't look up. However, her eyes were locked on the 9 CCTV feeds cycling across her screen. 4 more in the east stairwell, moving up. Another burst of gunfire. The bulletproof glass on the north wall held, spiderwebbed but standing. "Can you kill the elevator?" "Already on it." Her fingers flew. "But that's not the problem." "Then what is the problem?" She looked up at him across the chaos. "1 second. Just one. Your firewall isn't breached. Your CFO is." The lights went out. 8 weeks, 6:40 p.m. London. Adaoma Okoro was at her desk in Whitechapel, cross-referencing 3 months of shell company transactions for a Swiss asset manager, when the document landed in her encrypted inbox. Unknown sender. Numerical domain. She almost deleted it without opening. Almost. The subject line stopped her. Okoro Family Holdings. Resolution package. She opened it. The first page was a debt summary. Clean formatting. Brutal numbers. 2.4 billion won, approximately $1.8 million. Owed by her father, Victor Okoro, to a Korean-backed logistics syndicate after a collapsed import venture that had taken him 4 years to build and 6 months to watch fall apart. She knew about the debt. She had been quietly wiring money home for 11 months. Measured amounts, calculated to buy time without attracting attention. The syndicate had attached a hard deadline. 14 days. Beyond that, a default clause transferred the Okoro family compound in Lagos, her father's life's work, and 3 generations of a family name, to a shell company in Macau. She turned to page 2. Debt cleared. She stared at those 2 words. Then she turned to page 3. She read the clause once, understood it fully on the first pass. Read it a second time looking for the part where it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Marriage contract, Adaoma Okoro and Kang Sejin. Duration, 18 months. Public union. No annulment before term. Full financial transparency required. Our primary residence, Gangnam, Seoul. Effective upon signature. She set her pen down. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she opened a flight booking site and searched for the next available direct flight to Seoul. She booked the 9:45 a.m. departure, 3 days out, not to sign, to look this man in the face and tell him exactly what he could do with his contract. She called her father from the cab to Heathrow. He answered on the second ring. He's sounding like a man who hadn't slept in 2 weeks and had found a grim peace with that fact. "Ada," he said, "tell me you didn't know about the clause." Silence. "Long enough. Papa, they told me it was a formality, that the man doesn't actually intend." "Did you read it?" More silence. "Did you read the document?" "I read it." His voice dropped to something that barely qualified as sound. "Adaoma, they had a photograph of Chidi's school gate. In the background you could see the window of his classroom. They were not asking." She pressed her hand flat against the cold cab window and stared at the motorway lights blurring past. Lagos was 6,000 kilometers away. The compound was her mother's kitchen tiles, the cracked second step on the staircase. The mango tree her grandmother had planted 50 years ago. Her father had built everything he had so his children would have something to inherit. And now it was collateral for a marriage she hadn't agreed to. "I'll handle it," she said. "You cannot go to Seoul and fight these people." "I'm not going to fight them." She pulled her hand from the glass. "I'm going to walk into his office, put the contract on his desk, and explain why this arrangement is not going to happen." Her father was quiet. Then, his name is Kang Se-jin. I know. They say he controls half the private investment infrastructure in Gangnam. 47 employees. None of them have ever spoken his name in public. Good, Adaoma said. Then he's not used to being told no. Incheon Airport, 8:22 a.m. local time. By 11 a.m., a black vehicle was waiting outside arrivals. The driver held a card with nothing on it except her name. She got in. 47 minutes later, a glass tower in Gangnam, so clean and vertical it looked like it had been inserted into the skyline with surgical precision. A woman in gray met her at the elevator. Miss Okoro, I'm Sua, Mr. Kang's executive assistant. He's expecting you on the 37th floor. Good, Adaoma said. Take me there. Sua paused. I was told to show you to your room first. You'll be on the 35th floor for the duration of my room, for the duration of your stay. Your belongings have been... I didn't send my belongings ahead. Sua's expression held perfectly still. Mr. Kang arranged for... He had my luggage searched. He had your luggage secured. Adaoma looked at the elevator, then at the gray blazer. Then she picked up her carry-on and stepped into the elevator herself. Floor 37, she said. Sua stepped in after her. Miss Okoro, I really must... You can tell him I was difficult in your report later. The 37th floor was glass on every wall. Seoul lay flat and enormous in every direction. The space was precise. No excess, no decoration that didn't serve a purpose. The penthouse of a man who considered comfort a form of waste. Kang Se-jin stood at the far window with his back to her, finishing a phone call in rapid Korean. He didn't turn around. She walked to the center of the room and stood there, waiting. He ended the call. Pocket. Then he turned. He was taller than she'd expected. Dark suit, no tie. The stillness about him wasn't cultivated. It was structural, the way a column is still. Most powerful men radiated something. Aggression, appetite, the need to dominate a room. Kang radiated nothing. He simply occupied the space and let everything else arrange itself around him. And he looked at her, the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved. Miss Okoro, he said. English, precise, lightly accented. You made good time. I want to discuss the contract. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Something shifted in his expression, nearly imperceptible, like the surface of still water when a current moves underneath. Then stand, he said. He walked to his desk, sat, looked at her without urgency. What would you like to discuss? What you think you purchased? I purchased nothing. He picked up a pen, set it down. The contract is a legal arrangement between consenting parties. My father signed under duress. That isn't consent. You're here. He looked at her steadily. That tells me you believe there's a conversation worth having. She took 2 steps closer. You cleared 2.4 billion won in debt and attached a marriage clause to the settlement document. Well, you sent a photograph of my brother's school gate to my father's home address. You had my luggage cataloged before I landed. This isn't a proposal. This is acquisition. I don't acquire people. Then what exactly is this? He studied her. Not the way men usually studied her. Assessing, cataloging. He looked at her the way someone examines a system they want to understand from the inside. A proposal, he said, with unconventional terms. My answer is no. He picked up the pen again. Here, your father's debt is already cleared. The compound is secure. Your brother's school is no longer being monitored. None of that was conditional on your signature. She went still. Then what is conditional? Nothing. He set the pen down. I need a public union. 18 months. My board requires it for a succession structure. My mother requires it to stop overriding my decisions. The political circles I operate in require it for optics. He paused. I need someone who is not decorative. I need someone functional. And you chose me. You recovered 890 million won in stolen assets for a Zurich hedge fund in 68 hours without alerting a single regulator. You traced 3 offshore accounts through 4 jurisdictions using nothing but public filing records and a pattern analysis that took your competitors 3 months to replicate. He looked at her. You're not a trophy. You're a weapon. That's a different kind of need. The room held the silence between them. In 18 months, she said. 18 months. I keep my clients. My work continues. Your access will expand here, not contract. My movements are my own. He paused. Within the building, yes. Outside, I need your schedule. For surveillance or safety? In my world, Miss Okoro, the two are the same. She looked out at Seoul. 47 floors of glass and gray sky, and a city that moved like it had already decided where it was going. She thought about her father's voice, the compound, Chidi's classroom window. I want my own workspace on the 35th floor. It's prepared. I want full system access for my client work. Unrestricted upload. Done. She looked back at him. You were very certain I'd agree. I was certain, he said, that you were a woman who solves problems, and I am a problem with a solution. She picked up her carry-on, walked to the elevator, stopped at the threshold. Mr. Kang. He looked up. Don't make the mistake of thinking you understand me because you've read my file. She stepped into the elevator. She felt his eyes on her back until the doors closed. A wardrobe waited on the 35th floor, floor to ceiling, designer, organized by occasion, calibrated to her exact measurements, chosen in colors that would have suited her perfectly if she'd picked them herself. She stood in front of it for 30 seconds. Then she opened her carry-on, hung her own clothes at the far end, and left everything else untouched. Sua reported it within the hour. The next morning, Sejin said over breakfast, without preamble, the clothes carry no obligation. I know, Adaoma said. The stylist is among the best in Seoul. I don't doubt it. She's dressed 3 first ladies. Impressive. Adaoma looked up. I'm not a first lady. He watched her drink her coffee. Then, you're going to be difficult. I'm going to be myself. She set the cup down. Those are sometimes the same thing. Something passed across his face, not irritation, something that looked, much from a certain angle, like the beginning of fascination. He went back to his reports. The pattern established itself across the next 3 weeks. Mornings, working breakfast, 37th floor. He reviewed acquisition reports. She ran client work. They sat at opposite ends of a 12-seat table and sometimes went 40 minutes without speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was efficient. And somewhere in those silences, she had stopped noticing how long they lasted. On afternoons, she worked from the 35th floor. Her active clients had no idea she was running their forensic work from Seoul. Her software didn't care which city it was in. Evenings, board dinners, fundraisers, 2 galas in the first week alone. She wore her own clothes to everything. At each event, Sejin introduced her with one hand placed at the exact small of her back. Not possessive, not tender, but precisely positioned, like everything he did. He offered her a protection detail. She refused. He offered his corporate card. She refused. He offered a private chef for personal meals. She said she'd use the delivery app she'd already downloaded. He sent Sua to ask quietly if there was anything at all she would accept. Adaoma considered it for 20 seconds. The upload speed on the 35th floor is inconsistent. Fix it. Sua stared at her. That's it, Adaoma said. Just the upload speed. The network was upgraded within 4 hours. Sejin said nothing about it. But at the next morning's breakfast, the way he looked at her had changed. Not warmly, not softly. Like a man who has realized that the equation he thought was simple is the most interesting problem he's encountered in years. That was the beginning of something. Neither of them had a name for it yet. It was in week 3 that Park Hyun-suk first entered her orbit. Sejin's CFO 51. Quiet in the way of men who have learned that silence is its own form of authority. At their first meeting, a board briefing Adaoma attended as Sejin's public partner, Hyun-suk had pulled out a chair for her before anyone else in the room moved. A small thing. She'd noted it. Miss Okoro, he said, settling into his own seat with the ease of a man completely at home. Sejin speaks highly of your analytical background. That's generous of him, she said. It isn't generosity. He smiled, warm, unhurried, the smile of a man with nothing to hide. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. 9 years I've known him. He doesn't do that. 9 years, she said. Since the beginning. He looked across the room at Sejin. And what she saw in his face looked exactly like pride, like genuine, uncomplicated loyalty. Before Kang Holdings was what it is now, before this building, before the money was real, he trusted me with the first set of accounts when there were only 3 of us and the numbers barely filled a single page. She had believed him. That was the part she'd come back to later, alone in the dark of the 35th floor, running the traces and watching the numbers tell a completely different story. She had believed every single word. The fundraiser was a Thursday. Black tie, a private venue in Itaewon, white walls, ambient lighting, men in suits that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Adaoma wore a deep burgundy dress she'd brought from London. No stylist, no borrowed jewelry, a thin gold bracelet she'd had since university. Sejin looked at her when she came down from the 35th floor and said nothing for a moment. Just looked. 1 full second where his eyes stayed on her face, and whatever calculation he was running produced no visible output. Then, "You look prepared." "That's always the intention," she said. He nodded once, but the beat before the nod, that half-second pause, was something she filed away without meaning to. They arrived together, moved through the crowd in the pattern they'd developed, adjacent but independent, finding each other without effort when the evening required it. At 9:47 p.m., Adaoma was standing near the bar listening to a securities lawyer describe a corporate dispute when she caught a number on the screen of the man 2 steps to her left. He wasn't being careless. He simply didn't imagine anyone near him would know what they were looking at. 480 million won. Timestamp 2134. Destination account. A denominator string she didn't recognize but would within minutes. The transfer had processed 6 minutes ago. She excused herself from the lawyer, walked to the bathroom, and opened her secure browser and ran the account code she'd memorized in 2 seconds of peripheral vision. The account belonged to a holding company in Busan. 2 layers of shell entities later, she had the ownership structure, a private fund controlled by the Shin Group, the single largest organized rival to everything Kang Sejin had built. Someone inside Sejin's organization had just sent 480 million won to his enemies. While he was in the same building, she stood in the bathroom looking at her reflection for one breath. Just one. Then she walked back out, found Sejin near the main entrance, and touched his elbow. He turned immediately. "I need 36 hours," she said quietly, "and full access to your internal transaction logs." His expression didn't move. "Why?" "Because someone inside your organization just transferred 480 million won to a Busan holding company that belongs to the Shin Group." The room kept moving around them. Music played. Tea crystal clinked. Sejin looked at her for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something shifted behind his eyes. Not panic, nothing close to panic, but a rapid internal recalculation. His jaw tightened once. His right hand at his side closed briefly into a fist. Not for long, not dramatically. Just the one involuntary tightening of a man who has trained himself to absorb impacts without showing them, but cannot, in this particular moment, stop the reflex entirely. Then it was gone. "Yes, you're certain," he said. "I traced the account structure from a number I saw on a stranger's phone screen for 2 seconds." She held his eyes. "I'm certain." He nodded once, took out his phone. One message. Sent. By the time they reached the penthouse, Sua had opened full access to the internal financial architecture. Adaoma sat down at her workstation at 11:15 p.m. She did not. The first 12 hours were about pattern recognition. She pulled 6 months of outgoing transfers above 50 million won and built a transaction map. Every payment, every receiving account, every timestamp. She wasn't looking for the money yet. She was looking for the shape, for the structure someone had used to hide it. By hour 14, she had it. It was elegant, she had to admit. Whoever designed the rerouting understood that large single transfers trigger automated flags. So they'd fragmented the movement. 12 separate transfers, each between 30 million won and 60 million won, timed to coincide with legitimate operational payments, so they disappeared into the noise. The 12 fed a pooling account. The pooling account sent one consolidated outgoing transfer. The 480 million won on Thursday night wasn't the first movement. It was the 16th. Total extracted over 6 months. 6.3 billion won. She sat back, let the number settle. Then she pulled the authorization signatures. Every transaction carried the same secondary approval stamp. Park Hyun-suk, Chief Financial Officer. She sat very still with that for a moment. The man who had pulled out her chair, who had spoken about Sejin with 9 years of warmth threaded through every word, who had said he doesn't say things he doesn't mean while looking across a boardroom at the man he was systematically dismantling. She had believed him. She pulled the full authorization history, went back 16 months, found the first test transfer, 18 million won, barely enough to notice. A man testing a door gently to see if it opened. It had opened. And for 16 months, Park Hyun-seok had walked through it, quietly, methodically, with the patience of someone who had spent 9 years learning exactly how much trust a man would extend before he thought to look down and check whether the foundation was still there. She had his complete file by hour 34, 17 pages, transaction records, account traces, shell company registrations, and a full timeline beginning with that first cautious 18 million won and ending with Thursday night's 480 million won. The 16th movement, the most confident one yet, made by a man who had long since stopped being afraid of getting caught. At 9:13 a.m. on the second morning, she walked upstairs, placed the document on Sejin's desk, and said, well, your CFO has been stealing from you for 16 months and routing the money to the Shin Group. Sejin sat completely still. He read all 17 pages, every line. His face showed nothing. When he finished, he placed the document flat on the desk and was quiet for a long time. Does anyone else have this? No one. I ran the entire trace on isolated hardware. Another silence. Longer. 9 years, he said. Not to her. To the document. To something private and internal she was watching him absorb. The slow structural collapse of a trust built across a decade. He was there before the money was real. Before this building. Before any of this existed. She said nothing. Because there was nothing that would make that smaller. In the data, he said, and here his voice dropped half a register, became something careful and controlled in a way that told her exactly how much effort the control was costing. Is there any point where the transfers slowed down? Any period where the amounts dropped? Any indication that he stopped. She understood what he was asking. He was asking if his CFO had ever hesitated. If there had been a moment, any moment, where the man had looked at what he was doing and paused. No, she said gently. The transfers were consistent. They increased in frequency in month 4. The pattern shows no hesitation. Something moved across Sejin's jaw. Not dramatic, barely visible. But it was there. A single, unguarded contraction of grief that lasted less than 2 seconds before the stillness returned and sealed itself back over him. He never hesitated, Sejin said quietly. No. He nodded once, filed it away somewhere he would not open again. What I'm about to tell you, he said, cannot leave this room. Understood. Hyun-seok isn't just stealing. If the Shin Group has 6 months of our internal financial architecture, they can trigger a regulatory inquiry. If they time it with a coordinated short position on our listed assets, he stopped. They're not draining us. They're building a weapon to destroy us publicly. Adaoma looked at the document. Then we move before they fire it. He looked at her. You have 17 pages of evidence and a shareholders meeting in 4 days. She met his eyes. You need someone who can present this, expose the CFO, protect core operations, and neutralize the regulatory threat before the Shin Group activates it. She paused. Do you have someone else? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. No, he said. Then, the first night Sejin stayed on the 35th floor was not romantic. He came down at 1:30 a.m. with a report, pulled a chair to the opposite end of her workstation, and worked in silence while she continued building the evidence structure. At some point, coffee appeared on the desk beside her keyboard. She hadn't asked for it. Neither had he. Neither of them mentioned it. They worked like that for hours. The city outside doing its slow, indifferent rotation through the night. The only sounds, keys, on paper, the occasional soft movement of someone shifting in their chair. At 4:06 a.m., he said, You've been working for over 40 hours. I slept 3 hours yesterday afternoon. That's not what 40 hours without sleep means. It means I'm functional and the work needs to be finished. She kept typing. Is that a problem for you? No, he said. She glanced up. He was looking at her, not at the document in front of him, not at the city behind her, but at her. And there was something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not admiration, not analysis. Something quieter and more unguarded. Like a man who has stopped performing stillness for a moment and is simply present. She looked back at her screen, but her fingers slowed for exactly 2 keystrokes before she corrected them. He left at 5:20 a.m. She stared at the door for 3 seconds after it closed. Then she went back to work. By 9 a.m., when 2 board members were in Sejin's office asking with exquisite diplomatic care whether his personal arrangement was affecting his operational discipline, he dismissed them in 4 minutes. He told Adaoma at breakfast, factually, without apology. She looked up from her coffee. Does that concern you? My board questioning my judgment concerns me structurally. And personally? He was quiet for a moment. Very little concerns me personally. That's not an answer. He looked at her. What concerns me personally is when systems I've designed with precision are disrupted by variables I didn't account for. She held his gaze. Am I still a variable? You were. He picked up his report. I'm still deciding what you are now. She went back to her coffee, but she felt it. That sentence sitting in the air between them with weight and temperature, pressing gently against every wall she decided to keep standing. The family dinner was in week 5. Madame Kang, Sejin's mother, was 70 years old, dressed in silk the color of polished steel, with eyes that completed a full assessment of a person in under 30 seconds. She took 30 seconds on Adaoma at the entrance. Then she turned to her son and spoke in Korean. Sua translated almost inaudibly. She said, you brought a foreigner to this table. Adaoma didn't change her expression. The dinner was formal, correct, and intense in the specific way of families where the tension predates the meal by many years. Halfway through the second course, Madame Kang looked directly at Adaoma and said, in carefully selected English, each word placed with surgical precision, your family in Nigeria. What is it they do? My father runs a logistics company. My mother was a secondary school principal. She passed 6 years ago. And you are a financial analyst. Forensic analyst, Sejin said. His tone was even. The distinction is significant. His mother's eyes moved to him. She is at this table because of a debt settlement. She is at this table, Sejin said, because I asked her to be here. Your grandfather built this family's position over 40, and I have spent 12 years expanding it past anything my grandfather imagined. He set his chopsticks down without a sound. This is a dinner, not a committee vote. His mother looked at him, then at Adaoma. On the look of a woman recognizing a decision already made and realizing she is being informed, not consulted. She picked up her glass and changed the subject. In the elevator going up afterward, Adaoma said, you didn't have to do that. I know. She'll make your succession structure difficult. She's been making my succession structure difficult since I was 22. He looked at the elevator doors. That wasn't about the succession structure. She didn't ask what it was about. She already knew, and knowing was more unsettling than not knowing had ever been. 3 days later, security footage leaked to a tabloid. One image, the lobby, 2 figures, Sejin unmistakable, her face half turned toward him. She had been tending a cut on his hand from a broken glass during a board dinner. She'd taken his hand without thinking, turned it palm up, cleaned the cut with the precision of someone who treats every problem directly and without fuss. He had gone very still while she did it. The photograph had caught that stillness. His face turned slightly toward her hands. His expression in that one frozen frame, something that had no category in the language of how powerful men were supposed to look. The tabloid headline, Kang Sejin's mystery companion. Within a week, 2 of her existing clients sent careful diplomatic emails. She lost the Singapore family office. She told Sejin at breakfast. He didn't respond immediately. And then, I can compensate the lost retainer. That's not the point. Then what is? She looked at him steadily. The point is that this arrangement costs both of us something real. I want us both paying that with full awareness. He was quiet for a moment. What would change if we weren't paying it? She didn't answer, because the answer was nothing, and neither of them needed to say it. The man's name was Deputy Director Cho. He contacted Adaoma's London number on a Tuesday morning while Sejin was in a board review. Government Financial Crimes Liaison. Polite, precise. The specific stillness of a man who wins negotiations by never appearing to be in one. They met in a cafe in Apgujeong. He ordered tea. Didn't touch it. "Miss Okoro," he said, "I'll be direct. Please. We are aware of your arrangement with Kang Sejin. We know its origin, and we are also aware of the work you've been doing inside his financial infrastructure." He paused. "We'd like to offer you an exit." He placed a folder on the table. British citizenship, fast-tracked, 6 weeks processing, a settlement, 5 billion won, transferred to an account of her choosing. Her family's name cleared from every financial risk register in Korea, Japan, and Singapore. Clean, immediate, untraceable. The condition, Cho said, is that you leave Seoul within 14 days. I permanently. She looked at the folder, at the numbers, at the word cleared sitting next to her family name. She thought about her father's voice, the compound, the mango tree. She closed the folder. "No," she said. Cho studied her. "Miss Okoro, I understand the offer. There are people who would consider this freedom." She looked at him directly. "You're offering me safety. I'm not afraid." She pushed the folder across the table. "When and I don't run when things become complicated." Cho was quiet. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not defeat, not frustration. Something more calculated than either. He picked up the folder with the unhurried patience of a man who hadn't really expected her to take it. That was the first thing that unsettled her. He had come here already knowing her answer. She didn't understand why until later. And she left the cafe and walked 2 blocks before she stopped on a quiet side street and stood very still, replaying the conversation. The untouched tea, the prearranged folder, the way he'd looked at her at the end. Not like a man who'd failed, but like a man who had completed a task. She opened her phone, ran a search on Deputy Director Cho's public-facing government profile. It was clean, too clean, the kind of clean that takes effort to maintain. And then she cross-referenced his name against 3 financial intelligence databases she kept private access to. It took 4 minutes. Cho's personal holding account, buried under a spouse's maiden name, had received a consulting payment 18 months ago from a legal services firm in Incheon. The legal services firm's beneficial ownership traced back to the Shin Group. She stood on the side street in the cold Seoul air and understood exactly what had just happened. The cafe meeting wasn't an exit offer, it was a test, designed to be reported back to someone, designed to tell the Shin Group one thing, whether Adaoma Okoro was a liability to Kang Sejin or a loyalty. She had just passed their test in exactly the wrong direction. The attack on the penthouse was coming. She didn't know when, but she understood now that Cho had just confirmed their target was worth hitting. She walked back to the tower and said nothing to anyone. She went to the 35th floor and quietly began mapping the building's security architecture in ways she had not done before. She found out Sejin knew about the cafe meeting 4 days later, late night on the 35th floor. He came in, set a cup of coffee beside her keyboard without being asked, and stood there. "You turned down 5 billion won," he said. She kept typing. "I heard the figure was 4. He adjusted after you sat down. Final offer was 5. Generous. Adaoma." She stopped typing. Her name, first name, for the first time in 8 weeks. The sound of it in his voice, flat, controlled, but unmistakably present, was different from every word he had said to her before. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with something that wasn't warmth and wasn't admiration and wasn't any of the things she'd built distance to manage. It was its own thing entirely, specific to him, specific to her, more specific to this tower, in these weeks and every quiet, costly, irreversible thing they'd moved through together. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "I know. I would have understood if you'd taken it. I know that too. He nodded slowly. Then, why didn't you? The question was real, not rhetorical. The question of a man who has turned something over many times in private and finally said it aloud. She looked at him. He looked back. The careful, maintained distance between them felt different in that moment. Not smaller exactly, but pulled taut. Like a wire vibrating at a frequency just below the point of snapping. She held his gaze for 2 seconds longer than was safe. Then, Cho isn't what he presented himself as, she said. His holding account connects to the Shin group. The meeting was a test to see if I'd leave. When I didn't, I told them exactly what they wanted to know. Sejin went very still. The attack, she said. It's coming. I don't know when, but they know now that I'm not leaving, which means I'm a permanent variable in their plan, which means they'll move to remove the variable directly. She looked at him. I've been mapping the building. He stared at her. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. Then quietly, how long have you known? 4 days. And you didn't tell me. I needed to be certain first. Another long silence. Anna, you were alone with that for 4 days. I work better alone. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not anger, not relief. Something closer to the specific pain of a man realizing that a person he has been watching over has been quietly watching over him instead. Don't do that again, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath the control, something unsteady. Whatever you find, whatever you know, tell me. She looked at him steadily. Understood. He nodded. A move to leave. Sejin. He stopped, turned. You should know, she said carefully, that the reason I didn't run. She stopped herself. He waited. The presentation will be ready by Wednesday, she said. He looked at her for one long moment. He knew what she'd stopped herself from saying. They both knew. And in the space where the words hadn't been spoken, something settled. Permanent, unannounced, already true. Wednesday, he said. He left at midnight. She sat at her workstation for 20 minutes after the door closed and didn't type a single word. If you've made it this far, you already know this story's different. Like this video and keep watching. The ending of this chapter will stay with you. Now you know how they got here. The elevator, 6 men, the gunfire, the 9 feeds, the blood soaking through Sejin's shirt. Her on the marble floor, fingers moving, because the floor is always the right position and there is no version of this where she stops working. This is what happened next. When Adaoma cut the building's main power, the penthouse went black. Emergency lighting. Red, low, directional. Enough to move. Not enough to aim by. They'll have thermal equipment, Sejin said from somewhere in the dark. Give me 40 seconds. She was already moving toward the network relay panel on the east wall. The one she'd found 4 days ago during her quiet, private security mapping. The one she'd told no one about until she told him. She pulled up the building's camera architecture. One by one, floors 33 through 37. She looped the feeds. External monitoring would now see empty corridors, clear stairwells, and an unoccupied building. She opened a second window and traced the interference signal. The frequency disruption that had killed the penthouse alarm relay 12 minutes before the gunshot started. East stairwell, floor 35. They came in through the east service entrance, she said. Someone provided the access code remotely. Cho, Sejin said, quiet, certain. Cho confirmed the target. Hyun-seo gave them the code. She opened the elevator architecture. And I'm locking elevator access between floors 30 and 37. Stairs only. Buys 4 minutes. She stood up. Can you move? He was already standing, weapon in hand, pale, bleeding, steady in the way walls are steady, not undamaged but built to hold. I can move, he said. She crossed the room toward him, reached up to check the wound, and stopped. They were closer than they had been since the night of the cut hand in the lobby. 6 inches of red emergency light between them. His face turned down toward her, not away. She could see the exact line of his jaw, the deliberate, measured rhythm of his breathing. For one moment, neither of them moved. She dropped her eyes to the wound, pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the bandage to check the seal. He pulled in a short, sharp breath. It's held, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. You'll need a hospital after. After, he agreed. And his voice, for the first time in 8 weeks, had lost its full measure of control. Just slightly, just enough. She stepped back, picked up the laptop bag. West side, service shaft, let's go. He followed without a word. They went up through the building's skeleton. Narrow metal rungs, cold walls, the sound of boots on stairwell doors 4 floors below, and emerged through a maintenance hatch onto a rain-soaked rooftop. Seoul spread in every direction, cold, glittering, vast. Sejin made 2 calls in 30 seconds. In the second call lasted 9 seconds. 8 minutes, he said. Extraction? Extraction. She stood in the rain and looked at him. Jacket soaked through. The wound on his side reopened, dark against gray fabric, breathing slow and deliberate. He hadn't once asked her to slow down, to wait, to be anything other than exactly what she was. When we get through this, she started. We get through it first, he said. She almost smiled. The helicopter came from the east at minute 7. They were outside Seoul for 4 days, a secure facility in Gyeonggi. Medical attention Sejin accepted without complaint, which told her more about the severity of the wound than anything he said. She slept for 11 hours straight, woke up, ate, and sat down to build the final presentation. Hyun-suk had been intercepted leaving the building. Cooperative, under the circumstances. Unsua brought the debrief report and sat across from Adaoma with the particular stillness of someone delivering information they find personally painful. He asked about you, Sua said. Hyun-suk. When they brought him in, the first thing he asked was whether you had found the full trail or just part of it. What did they tell him? Nothing. Adaoma was quiet for a moment. She thought about the boardroom, the pulled-out chair. 9 years. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. It turned out the most dangerous betrayal was the kind that looked like loyalty for 9 years before it looked like anything else. The kind that smiled warmly and spoke proudly and had already been stealing for 16 months by the time anyone sat across the table from it. She went back to work. The Shin Group's financial ambush was scheduled for Thursday. A coordinated short position on Kang Holdings' listed assets, watch timed with an anonymous regulatory filing carrying Hyun-suk's 6 months of stolen internal data. Trigger time, 9:30 a.m. The shareholders' meeting, 9 a.m. Adaoma's presentation was 17 pages of forensic evidence, 3 supplementary exhibits, and a 6-minute narrated transaction timeline. 41 hours of construction, every number sourced, every trace verified. Sejin reviewed it Wednesday night, all 17 pages, both exhibits. Watched the timeline twice. And then, this exposes the Taeyang accounts. Yes, those are 12 billion won in undisclosed assets. I know. The regulatory exposure is manageable with the right legal structure. You know that. She leaned forward. If I remove the Taeyang accounts, the trace has a gap. The gap creates doubt. Doubt is the only weapon they have left. She held his eyes. I'm not removing them. He was quiet for a long time. You're saving my life, he said. Ash, at the cost of my empire. I'm saving the real parts of your empire. The parts built on something that will last. Her voice was steady. The shadow holdings were always a liability. Now they become a controlled disclosure. Your legal team presents it as proactive transparency. That's a completely different story than the Shin Group releasing it as an exposé. He looked at the document, then at her. Why does it matter to you? What survives? She held his gaze. Sure, because you trusted the presentation, and I don't do incomplete work for people who trust me. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not obviously, but it moved and didn't move back. Run it as is, he said. 9 a.m. Thursday. 24 board members, 6 external advisors, 3 legal representatives. The room went quiet in the particular way of spaces where the unexpected is already in the air. She presented for 22 minutes. By minute 4, her 2 board members were verifying her numbers in real time. By minute 11, 3 legal representatives were on their phones. By minute 17, the room had the texture of a space where everyone has simultaneously understood that what they thought was happening is completely different from what actually has been. The Taeyang accounts appeared in Exhibit 3, a proactive disclosure, framed and held by Sejin's legal team without a crack. At 9:31 a.m., the Shin Group's anonymous regulatory filing landed. It landed on a story already told in full. It had nothing left to ignite. Park Hyun-seok was arrested at 11:40 a.m. Cho was placed under formal government review by 3 p.m. His connection to the Shin Group surfaced within hours once investigators knew exactly where to look. The man who had offered Adaoma an exit was himself being escorted out of his office building before the day was done. She didn't feel satisfaction about that. Only a cold and clean sense of completion. The threat was over. The mole was in custody. The Shin Group's operation had collapsed. The regulatory exposure was in controlled legal hands. Cho's alignment with the Shin Group was now a matter of government record. The board was shaken, but the structure held. Sejin's empire was smaller in some ways than it had been 48 hours ago, but cleaner. And clean, she had learned, was worth more than large when it came to things that needed to last. When their 18-month contract still had 11 months remaining. At 4:22 a.m., Adaoma was on the balcony of the 37th floor. The rain had stopped. Seoul below them doing what it always did, glittering quietly, indifferent, vast, holding 10 million lives inside itself with no comment. She heard him come out. He stood beside her. The distance they had maintained for 8 weeks. Not the distance of strangers, not the distance of lovers. One but the specific calibrated space of two people who have been through something real together and are still deciding what to name it. A long silence. When the contract ends, he said, "You're free." She looked at the city. "I know. 11 months. I know." A pause, then, "You could leave before that. I would arrange." "Sejin." He stopped. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the city, jaw set. There was still a bandage under his shirt. He looked like a man being very careful not to say something he had decided, for reasons he hadn't fully examined, not to say yet. "I was never here because I was trapped," she said. He looked at her then, fully, the way he'd looked at her across the dark room with the red emergency lights bleeding across the walls. Like a man encountering something he has no existing category for and has quietly, privately stopped trying to create one. I got on a plane to Seoul to tell you what you could do with your contract." She turned back to the city. "I'm still here. Think about why." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Stay. Not when the contract ends. Not 11 months. Not the careful, qualified, structured language he used for everything else. Just stay." She felt the word land somewhere it had no business landing. Somewhere it was going to be very difficult to remove. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the city, at the lights, at the 10 million lives below them, all moving forward in their own directions, none of them aware of this balcony or these two people, or the wire pulled taut between them. Then she looked down at her hand. The wedding ring, slim, gold, chosen by a legal team for a contract, sat on her finger the way it had for 8 weeks, never quite tight, never once removed. She reached for it. Her thumb and forefinger closed around it. She felt him go still beside her, not dramatically, just the particular held quality of someone who has stopped breathing and is waiting. She could feel it without looking. The shift in him, the full and careful attention directed at her hand and what it did next. She began to pull it off, got it halfway to her first knuckle, and stopped. She held it there, half off, half on. The city below offered nothing. The cold air offered nothing. There was only the ring, halfway between one meaning and another, and Sejin beside her, not breathing, when not speaking, not reaching, just waiting with the complete and devastating patience of a man who has decided that whatever she chooses, he will not influence it. And that restraint, that absolute refusal to reach, was the thing that undid her more than anything else he had ever done. She slid the ring back down, all the way, to where it had always been. She heard him exhale, barely audible, just the soft release of a breath he'd been holding since her fingers first moved. And neither of them spoke. He lifted his hand from his side and placed it on the railing beside hers, not touching, close enough that the space between their fingers had its own specific temperature. The city held them both. Neither of them moved, The ring was on her finger. Loose. Not removed. Not removed. Unfinished. 11 months left on a contract neither of them wanted to end. The ring stayed where it was, and neither of them could explain, not honestly, why. If this ending pressed somewhere it wasn't supposed to, that means the story did its job. Subscribe now. The next story on this channel will hit just as hard. Comment below with one word. What was Adaoma thinking when she slid that ring back on? Like this. Share it with someone who needs to see what real storytelling looks like. We'll see you in the next one.